In a quiet town just outside Portland, Oregon, where the mornings smelled like wet pine trees and fresh coffee, lived a man named Daniel Harper. At 39, Daniel had what most people would call a successful life. He was a project manager at a tech company, owned a nice house, and drove a reliable car. Yet, every morning, as he sat at his kitchen table scrolling through his phone, a heavy dissatisfaction pressed on his chest. Promotions came slower than he hoped. His savings never felt like enough. His relationships felt distant. Daniel often thought, I did everything right, so why does life still feel so empty? Daniel's days were a blur of routine. Wake up, rush through breakfast, complain silently about the traffic, criticize his coworkers in his head, and then collapse on the couch at night, completely drained. Gratitude was a foreign concept. If you'd asked him what he was thankful for, he probably would have said, I'll be grateful when things finally improve. To Daniel, gratitude felt like pretending, something people did only after they had already won at life. One rainy afternoon, his company sent him to a small coastal town to oversee a delayed construction project. The project was a complete mess: budget, issues, angry clients, and constant pressure from headquarters. Totally frustrated, Daniel ducked into a local cafe after work. The place was warm, filled with soft jazz and the smell of freshly baked bread. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair and bright, attentive eyes. Her name tag read Margaret. You look like someone carrying the whole world on his shoulders, she said gently, handing him his coffee. Daniel forced a smile. Feels like it, he replied. Margaret nodded, as if she truly understood. Come here often, she asked. First time, Daniel said, and probably the last. This town is just another problem I have to fix. Margaret chuckled softly. Problems don't always need fixing, she said. Sometimes they just need understanding. Daniel raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He paid and left, dismissing her words as friendly small talk. But later that night, lying in his unfamiliar hotel bed, her sentence echoed in his mind. The next evening, Daniel found himself back at the cafe. It was partly for the coffee, but also because something about the place felt strangely calming. Margaret remembered him instantly. As she prepared his drink, Daniel noticed a small, worn notebook on the counter, its pages yellowed with age. What's that? He asked. Margaret smiled. My gratitude journal. Daniel almost laughed. You actually believe in that stuff? Margaret wasn't offended. She slid the notebook toward him. I don't believe in it, she said calmly. I've lived it. And then she told him her story. Years ago, she had lost her husband unexpectedly. Shortly after, her small business failed. She was left with very little money, poor health, and long, lonely nights. I was angry at life, she confessed. I felt cheated. Then one day, a doctor suggested something that sounded ridiculous. Write down 3 things I was grateful for each day. Daniel shook his head. And that fixed everything. No, Margaret replied honestly. It didn't fix my problems, but it fixed me. And once I changed, my life started to follow. Intrigued, despite himself, Daniel listened as she explained. Gratitude, she said, had trained her mind to notice what was working instead of just what was missing. Slowly, her stress began to decrease. Her sleep improved. She started treating people with more kindness, not because her life was suddenly perfect, but because she stopped waiting for perfection to finally start living. Before Daniel left, Margaret tore a blank page from her notebook and handed it to him. Try it for 7 days, she said, not because you believe it will work, but just because you're curious. That night, Daniel stared at the blank paper for a long time. Finally, with a sigh of reluctance, he wrote, 1. Hot coffee after a long day. 2. A warm place to sleep. 3. A job, even if it's stressful. It felt forced, almost pointless, but he folded the paper and put it in his pocket. The next day at work, something unexpected happened. During a tense meeting, Daniel caught himself just as he was about to snap at a colleague. Then, he remembered Margaret's calm voice. He paused. Instead of reacting, he just listened. The meeting ended faster than usual. The tension was still there, but it felt softer. That evening, Daniel wrote again. This time, the words came a little bit easier. By the 4th day, he started noticing subtle changes. He felt less exhausted in the mornings. He complained less during his commute. He even called his sister, someone he hadn't spoken to properly in months. Gratitude wasn't removing his problems, but it was changing how heavy they felt. The same challenges were there, but Daniel felt more capable of facing them. On the 7th day, Daniel returned to the cafe to thank Margaret. She listened quietly as he described his week. "So," she asked with a gentle smile, "does gratitude actually work?" Daniel thought for a moment. "It doesn't change the world," he said slowly, "but it changes how I show up in it." Margaret's smile widened. "And that," she said, "changes everything." Months later, back in Portland, Daniel kept the habit alive. He wrote down his 3 things every single morning before he even checked his phone. Over time, his leadership style at work improved. His team began to trust him more. Opportunities started to appear, not magically, but naturally, because people were responding to his calmer, more present energy. Daniel still faced stress, setbacks, and uncertainty, but he no longer lived in a state of constant dissatisfaction. He had learned a powerful truth. Gratitude isn't about ignoring reality. It's about choosing where you place your attention. When you focus only on what's missing, life will always feel like a struggle. But when you start to notice what's already there, you build the strength you need to create more. Gratitude works not because it makes life easy, but because it makes you stronger. It teaches you patience, it builds your resilience, and it reminds you that growth begins not with having more, but with appreciating what you already hold. And perhaps the greatest lesson Daniel learned was this: gratitude is not the reward for success, it is the foundation of it. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more content just like this. See you in the next one.